Hi students, Dr. Smith here to go over Chapter 17, Facilitating Pre-Academic and Cognitive Learning. And over here is an awesome photo of Colson in his classroom at the Blind Children's Center. Even though he's sleeping, there's still some learning going on. They're doing some tactile sensory work with shaving cream. So pretty cool for the children to be able to describe and get that tactile input with textures like shaving cream. So something simple and fun, but also helping with pre-academic and cognitive learning. Here are our objectives for Chapter 17. After reading this chapter, you should be able to describe how cognitive development and emerging literacy are related. Highlight what brain research tells us about children's development and how this can be used to design teaching activities. Understand why it is important to provide academic opportunities for preschoolers. Develop an understanding of what developmentally appropriate pre-academic activities look like. Explain how to design an early childhood classroom's pre-academic curriculum, including grouping of children, setup of tasks, and types of materials. So remember, make sure that after going over the objectives first, you think about what you already know about these concepts. You're adding that to your schema, your prior knowledge, before you continue and read the rest of the chapter. This will help you retain information, and then at the end, we revisit those objectives and we compare our previous learning to our new learning. And so again, I use the metaphor of we have these coat hooks in our brain. When you activate your prior knowledge by thinking about the objectives first, you're activating these coat hooks like in an analogous closet in your brain. And then as you're going through the chapter, you're adding items to those coat hooks. When you're adding new information, you're hanging a coat on that hook, you're hanging a hat on that hook, you're hanging a scarf and a belt, etc. And so you're elaborating on that information that you previously thought about. You are clarifying any misconceptions, things that maybe you had inaccurate recollections of, and you're adding all of this new learnings, and that's going to help you retain the information moving forward. All right, so let's take a moment and reflect on these objectives. All right, so cognitive development in emerging literacy. This involves reading, writing, listening, and speaking. Functionally illiterate are those who cannot perform well in one of those areas. Large numbers of children are coming to school without the experiences needed to learn literacy skills. Defining pre-academics. Pre meaning before, right? So this includes the whole child, not just in the classroom, not just what we consider traditional academic learning. Physical activities, social interactions, and creative and affective development. So affective development would include our social emotional development. More than just paper and pencil activities are included, right? Because we're looking at the whole child. We're looking at how they play, how they interact, how they're doing creative activities. Children are active explorers of their world. Children-initiated activities are key to cognitive growth and development. So again, the focus is on being child-centered. Children are going to initiate things that interest them, and so that is the key to cognitive growth and development. What does brain research tells us? Brain research is super fascinating to me. All about neuroplasticity. Brain research is really fascinating. Infants' brains are extremely active and busy forming synapses. Those are little explosions in the brain when we're making connections. So when I say explosions, I mean the connections that we're making when we're processing information. Our dendrites are forming at these synapses, and then they're making connections. So it's like a little electric charge. The brain functions on a use it or lose it principle. So the more that you are carving out these neural pathways of things that you're learning and doing, your brain is strengthening those connections. So the less you use those connections, you use your brain for certain functions, and then your brain forgets those neural pathways, and those pathways get weaker and weaker until you use it again. Nature and nurture play a role in the development of the brain. So think about nature in terms of how you're born, what things are inherited or genetic, and nurture are the things in the environment that help to influence the way that we're learning. Early care has decisive and long-lasting impact on children's brain development. And I'm sure you've seen lots of commercial for the first 3 years or the first 5 and how important. I can't remember the jingle right now, but talking to your kids, singing to your kids. I forgot how it goes. I'm sure somebody out there can remember. It comes on TV now about sing. I can't remember, but it's basically saying continue. Talk to your kids, sing to your kids from infancy, because you're helping strengthen those brain connections. So pretty cool. Now I'm gonna be thinking about what is that commercial that I keep hearing. It's on the tip of my tongue. Anyway, all right. There are sensitive periods for learning that only come around once, and this gives me goosebumps. I showed my students, my Child Development 1 students, a documentary about Jeannie Wiley. So some of you might be interested in checking it out. It's TLC documentary, Jeannie Wiley. Genie Wiley, Wiley. It's an extreme case of neglect that occurred in Los Angeles in the 1970s when Jeannie was found at age 13. She was basically chained in her room. No one spoke to her, so she didn't learn language. She lived obviously in an abusive home. Her father forbade her mother and her brother to speak to her. So all of those pathways of language were not activated. So in those 13 years of life where she didn't hear language, she wasn't able to practice language, there was no one around there speaking to her, she exceeded that critical period for learning language. When she was discovered at age 13 and there were some interventions, specialists came to her aid, and they found, the hypothesis is if a child doesn't get whatever they need during that critical period, then that's it. It's too late. And they found that she was starting to develop language, but unfortunately, because of trauma and other factors, both nature and nurture, she regressed and she was never able to catch up with language. So there are critical periods. And when we talk about fetal development in the womb, these critical periods, if a teratogen, also known as a harmful toxic substance, is introduced while the child is a fetus, then certain things may not happen at all, like limb development. I believe it's during day 20 something and 50 something, I don't remember the exact, but during that time, if a teratogen is introduced, the child will have missing limbs, because that is a very critical period of limb development. So if a mother is using drugs, for example, then the child will have deformed or incomplete limbs, because that is the time when that is developing. So this is really important to keep in mind with child development. Negative experiences or lack of stimulation have serious sustained effects on the brain. There's a lot of research coming out recently about how trauma changes the way that the brain develops. So when you have children who are in traumatic situations, exposed to trauma at a young age, how it literally changes the way that the brain develops. Intensive intervention is necessary to lessen the effects of disabilities. Banning academics, is that ill-advised? Good question. So academic skills are appropriate for preschoolers. Academics should be a part of the play experience. So it doesn't have to be either or. You can combine play with academics. Preschoolers thrive on absorbing new experiences. So why not capitalize on that? If they're eager to learn, we can teach them academics as well as other types of content as well. Paper and pencil tasks and workbooks, however, not so much appropriate for preschoolers, according to the text. So think about your learning of children that you work with or your own children. According to the textbook, paper and pencil tasks with preschool age children is not appropriate for their learning. It should be more hands-on, more exploratory, more student-centered. So what are some developmentally appropriate pre-academic experiences? So direct teaching. The teacher directly teaches a concept. So this is a part of the lesson plan cycle. If you've written a lesson plan, there is a portion where the teacher is directing the learning. This is where the teacher is providing the input, typically where the children are learning a new concept. So the teacher is providing the input. The teacher also blends direct teaching with an indirect and facilitative approach. So in some lesson plan formats, that would be, you go from direct teaching to the guided practice, where then the teacher releases control a bit, lets the child practice, but the teacher's facilitating and is there to guide, to answer questions, to offer support, and that scaffolding. So what are some developmentally appropriate pre-academic experiences? In addition, embedded learning. This is where children practice new skills and learn individualized goals within the regular classroom activities. The teacher would clarify the objective, determine their current level of performance. This is important. Determine times and places during the classroom day. Also design instructional interaction, implement the instruction, and establish data collection. And the data collection part is important because how do you determine if you are successful? So collecting the data, analyzing the data, determining if you're successful, and then figuring out what sort of supports or modifications you might need to make to improve on the student's learning, which is ultimately your goal. There's also computers and assistive technology available, which is amazing these days. Computers allow children to develop independent skills that they cannot do otherwise. So for example, Colson, my son, he currently is nonverbal, and so we use AAC, augmentative adaptive communication, for him. But now what's really cool is his speech therapist is also using an eye gaze machine. And so with the eye gaze machine, they calibrate the cursor of the computer with his eye gaze, and so he can look to something on the screen. So they might prompt him, and he can, if it's a story, he can look at a character in the story, and that will prompt the story to begin. Or he can watch as different images move across the screen, and we can see where he's looking. We might say follow the butterfly. There might be butterflies and balloons on the screen, and we can determine, can he determine where the butterflies are, and can he follow the butterflies? So it's really fascinating what the eye gaze machine is able to do. The computer software needs to be developmentally appropriate. So developmentally, not chronologically. So for my son who's 5, for a typically developing 5-year-old, you wouldn't use an eye gaze machine. They would be looking at books, developmentally appropriate books, which my son can too, but he needs the added support of the eye gaze to help him access that curriculum, for example. Evaluate the software for inappropriate content and violence. And computers enable a child to develop eye-hand coordination. So for those naysayers who say no technology or electronics, I think this is pointing out that there are a lot of benefits to using technology. So thinking about a child having to manipulate a mouse on a computer, they're developing hand-eye coordination. Even with video games, they are developing hand-eye coordination too. So there are definitely some benefits. You want to also foster an eagerness to learn. Children need to be encouraged to explore the environment, ask questions, and problem solve. They need to involve all their senses, so their sight, their taste, their touch, their sound, all those things, smell. Teachers need to support this eagerness, so we need to encourage it, encourage this inquisitive nature, curiosity, exploration. Engaging children's minds. Teachers show children how to record their thoughts. Teachers write down what a child says and then teach the child to read those thoughts. It is then a recording of a child's experiences for the future, so they can reflect back and look on what their thoughts were, what their reflections were. Valuing today's learning. Make learning real, right? Make it relevant to the child, something that's interesting to them, something that they can make real world connections to. Match children to activities that are developmentally appropriate and encourage their eagerness to learn, because children inherently are eager to learn. Readiness skills. Readiness is connected to maturation, how mature they are. Readiness as learning. Teacher needs to identify readiness skills that may be missing based upon developmental sequences. And then language readiness is part of readiness skills as well. Attention span. Wait, what? Just kidding. Attention span. The length of time an individual is able to concentrate on an activity is critical to all learning. Classrooms that are organized and inviting help children attend to a task and extend their attention span. Imitation and modeling. Imitation is the key to learning new skills. So children are going to imitate what they see, and this is how we help reinforce learning new skills. A child imitates the model to see how a skill is performed. If a child is having difficulty imitating, here are some things we can do. Imitate them instead. Provide models at their developmental level. So maybe they can't imitate what you as a teacher are doing, but maybe they can imitate what their classmate or peer is doing. Provide assistance and be directive. Make it fun and give encouraging feedback. Great job. I like the way you did that. Perceptual motor skills, understanding sensory messages and translating them. Sensory integration involving more than one sense in a response. Okay, so integrating the senses. Activities needed to be planned to support the use of senses for learning. Fine motor skills, eye-hand coordination and the use of fingers, wrists, and hands. Also eyes, so my son doing the eye gaze, that would also be an example of a fine motor skill. This is essential for self-care skills. Goes together with perceptual motor skills. Concept formation, internal images or ideas that organize thinking. It helps us to make sense of our world. Discrimination, which would be likenesses and differences. How are things alike and different? Not like racial discrimination, another type of discrimination. How are things the same? How are they different? Classification is imposing order. So putting things in, classifying, for example, different types of animals. How do we classify zoo animals versus farm animals or ocean animals? Seriation is arranging objects in order, maybe by color, maybe by size. Spatial and temporal relationships, how things go together in space and time. Memory. Long-term memory refers to events that happened a while ago. Short-term memory refers to events in the recent past. Memory is an essential skill to learning and building upon skills. And this is one of the reasons why at the beginning of each chapter I talk about information processing and how to help retain information by reading the objectives first. All of that has to do with information processing, which is tied to memory. It's all connected. Pre-academic experiences. Following directions. Children do best when directions are clear. So be very, very clear and specific. Also, one direction at a time is more likely to be completed than if you give them multiple step directions at once. So break it down one step at a time. Teachers should get down on the child's eye level to give directions. So rather than looking down on them, you're getting down to the child's eye level when you're giving them directions, because then they're going to engage more. They feel like you're respecting them, you're on their level, but also just a proximity thing. It's much easier to pay attention to somebody when you can see them and you can look into their eyes versus somebody up here. Emergent literacy. Literacy that is emerging. Rich teacher talk, storybook reading, phonological awareness activities, and alphabet activities. So all of these things are helping build their phonemic awareness and building those foundational literacy skills. What are some supports for emergent reading? Look at and read the books on their own and with their friends. What about support for emergent writing? This is encouraging emergent skills such as scribbling, random letters, strings, and invented spelling. This is all the normal part of emergent writing process. Shared book experiences where adults model the skills of reading and literacy, and then integrate content-focused activities. Investigate the topics that are of interest to children. I can't emphasize that enough. Trying to focus on things that children are interested in to help keep them motivated to learn, right? And it's relevant to them. It's something that I like. It's something that I'm interested in. So I'm more motivated to listen and I'm more engaged, and it's more meaningful to me because it's something that truly is important and interesting to me. Planning and presenting pre-academics. So here are some things to consider. One would be grouping children. You can group them by age. You can group them by ability. Groups should change as skill levels change. This is called flexible grouping, so they're not stuck in the same groups all the time. The number is set by the number of children and adults in the room, so keeping that ratio consistent. Arranging pre-academic group activities. So having advanced preparation, familiar and preferred materials and activities, individual workspace with name cards, individual setups, short periods, moving about, so they're not just sedentary in one spot, changing tasks, and transition activities. Transition activities are very important. How do you get children to move from one activity to the next? Enjoying teacher-directed activities. So if children are engaged and learning, teachers are happy. Yes, teachers spend more time planning and creating lessons. The lessons are more fun, and then the children continue to learn. So we covered chapter 17. Let's revisit those objectives. Now that you've read this chapter, you should hopefully be able to describe how cognitive development and emerging literacy are related, highlight what brain research tells us about children's development and how this can be used to design teaching activities, understand why it is important to provide academic opportunities for preschoolers, develop an understanding of what developmentally appropriate pre-academic activities look like, and finally, explain how to design an early childhood classroom's pre-academic curriculum, including grouping of children, setup of tasks, and types of materials. We've learned a lot this chapter. Hopefully it was meaningful and fun, and thanks for watching. I will see you next time.